You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. The Cauldron of Hate, a story by Baciocco.
Chapter 16. 3 days had passed since the League of Good had come to practice. The Cauldron of Hate, true to the Blinding Skull's word, had remained in the hate pit, each in their own quarters. The living lump spent most of his time attempting to make himself a milkshake, but found himself unable to. The plant lady didn't do much except tend to her plants, and even then, most of the time she had her plants tend to themselves. She found herself staring out the windows of the greenhouse, wishing she was back on the field with her team. The worst of the three was the Blinding Skull. He lied on his bed in his room, practically unmoving. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't eat, and his brain was eerily dark as the gloom of depression clouded his mind. The plant lady had tried to get him to at least eat something, but he was unresponsive. On the day they had driven home from that practice, the Blinding Skull had postulated that it would only be a day at most before the police came calling to haul them off to jail. They hadn't completed the terms of their agreement, so jail seemed like where it would all end up. The Blinding Skull imagined the League of Good smashing their way into the hate pit, or a SWAT-style raid by the Saddle River City Police Force. But day went into night again, and still they heard nothing. It was the morning after the third night that the doorbell rang. The Blinding Skull, for the first time in days, slowly pulled himself off his bed. Might as well not waste any time. Might as well get this over with. He hauled himself up onto shaky legs, and slipping his bare feet into his pink bunny slippers, slowly shuffled towards the big vault-style front door of the hate pit. He almost expected it to come crashing in on him as Suprema punched her way inside, but he was able to begin to open it with no problem, and no further ringing of the bell by whomever was at the door. As the big cylinder bolts released and the door began to swing open, he raised his hands into the usual position the police or League of Good made him assume whenever they took him in. The morning sun streamed in, and he squinted his eyes against the brightness. When his eyes adjusted, he was shocked. Instead of finding the League of Good on his doorstep or several hundred law enforcement officers with guns drawn, he saw 7 small silhouettes. When they came into focus, he saw it was the players of the Saddle River City Death Rays. The Blinding Skull blinked in surprise. He slowly lowered his arms and stared dumbfounded at the children on the front stoop of the hate pit. Taylor took a step through the door. "You guys live in a dump?" she said, crossing into the foyer. "We do," the Blinding Skull replied, his voice cracking as this was the first he had spoken since the last time they'd seen each other. Behind Taylor, the rest of the team crossed up into the hate pit. Reese looking around wildly at everything. Everything was impressing him. By now, the plant lady and the living lump had shuffled out to see who was at the door. They were just as surprised to see the team as the Blinding Skull had been. They were all smiles. "So, are you here as some sort of bait to get us to go outside so they can arrest us?" the Blinding Skull asked, arms folded. "Or did the League of Good send you to ridicule us further?" Taylor shook her head. "No. We all had a meeting and decided we wanted to come over, and our parents set up a carpool." The living lump scratched his head. "Your parents actually allowed you to come over here?" "Yeah," Scott said. "They all trust you guys. They've seen how you changed." The Blinding Skull looked at Taylor. "But I thought you were mad at us because we had cheated in the first game, and you never wanted to see us again." "We were mad," Taylor said. "Still am, kinda. You made us think we could win. Not only did you cheat, you lied to us. To us, the ones who are supposed to trust you." The Blinding Skull hung his head, feeling just as bad as he had that day on the field. "So why have you come here?" the Blinding Skull asked. "To rub it in further?" "No," Taylor said matter-of-factly. "We are here because we need you to coach us." The Blinding Skull, the plant lady, and the living lump all stared blankly at Taylor. After a good minute of silence, the living lump spoke. "But I thought we would be banned because we cheated." "The JYSO considered it," said Scott, "but they ultimately ruled that since you were sponsors at the time you cheated, not coaches, you could be removed as sponsors, but you aren't sponsors anymore. You're coaches, so you can't be removed as coaches for something you did as a sponsor." The Blinding Skull rubbed his temples. I am the smartest man on the planet, and that hurt my head. They also added that since it happened during a preseason game, it wouldn't count, as those games never count, Jane added. They also heard a bunch of testimony on whether or not you have cheated since, and the consensus is that you have not, Taylor said. Testimony, the plant lady said softly. From who? Us, said Zoe. And our parents, added Chris. And your biggest supporter of all, Arise added. Well, who's that? The Blinding Skull asked. Coach Templin, Arise answered. Wait, the Blinding Skull said, hands on hips. All of you and your parents and Coach Templin all defended us? The kids nodded. But why? The Blinding Skull asked softly. Because we believe in you, Taylor said with a smile. We know that deep down you've changed and that you wouldn't cheat again. You've made us into a winning team, and we want to keep winning, right, guys? Right, the kids all cheered together. What are we going to do? The plant lady asked. The Blinding Skull's skull began glowing just about brighter than it has ever glowed. We are going to coach some soccer. The kids cheered, and the Blinding Skull, for the first time in his life, found himself in the center of a group hug. He wouldn't admit it to anyone, but it actually felt pretty good.
You've been listening to The Cauldron of Hate. To download a PDF of the chapter you just heard, visit cauldronofhate.com. The Cauldron of Hate was written by Grant Baciocco. The story was edited by Liz Brown, and the audio was edited by Steven Staver. Music by Dan Ring. Special thanks to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who make this content possible. And a special mention to those who supported the producer level, including Dorothy Baciocco, Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Tony Urbano, David Akers, Jamie Donmeyer, and Vicky Sebring. To find out more about becoming a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. This episode is copyright 2021 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Baciocco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.